Hi, I'm Steve Hassan, and I have Joseph. And how do you pronounce your last name, Joseph?
Erobha.
Erobha.
It's
And I'm
Swahili.
cool, and I'm Hassan. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Can I ask
Uh,
you where you live? Where are we
I,
connected?
I live in Michigan,
Okay,
a small town, Three Rivers, right now, currently.
good. Well, I'm in the Boston area,
Yes.
and I understand you are in the Moonies. Is that true?
I was raised as a Catholic, but when my mother remarried, her new husband was a member of the movement. And so as around 9 or 10 years old, I was kind of brought up into the movement, and I was a very intense and serious follower for about 10 years, so through middle school and high school,
Right.
uh, which is all the more shocking that I left because right around the age of college, I took a critical thinking class, and I decided to myself, okay, if this is really true, if everyone is really the Messiah, then I have to subject my belief to every possible criticism. And if it is able to overcome that criticism, they'll know it's 100% true. Because at the time, all my life, I'd always struggled with some of the beliefs. Like I'd struggled with the teachings of indemnity, of punishing people for crimes they didn't commit.
Yep.
I struggled with the teaching of homosexuality because when I was in college, I got to know gay people and say, hey, these are nice people. They don't seem satanic to me.
Yep.
And uh, so I decided, thankfully at the time, internet was available. I mean, there was internet all throughout my childhood, but it wasn't as open as it is now.
Right.
And so I started, first thing I did, I read Nansuk's book, Nansuk Hong, and
Right.
her interview, and that helped me incredibly.
Good.
And then I saw your videos, and I said, hey, this man, he's an ex-member. He isn't satanic or evil. Nothing bad happened to him.
Let me check my horns. I'm not losing hair, but
Yeah. And I credit you for giving my life back
oh,
because you gave me the tools with which to free myself, the tools of which not only to free myself, but also to make sense of what happened to me, make sense of my whole experience.
that's great. That's
And I'm
wonderful.
eternally grateful for you. I consider you one of my personal heroes.
Oh, I'm touched. So
Yes, I
thank you.
read all your books. You got me to read Dr. Lifton's books, Thought Reform and Psychology Totalism. I've watched your interviews with Dr. Zimbardo and the Stanford Prison Experiment,
Yep.
and I saw your video of Mr. Pascal Zivi about the secret history, and also Alan Tate Wood, who I
Yeah.
respect as
So
well.
Pascal is a Japanese Christian who
Oh,
helps people get out of the Moonies and other cults in Japan. He went there to
yes.
study judo. He did
Oh,
a trip to Korea because he really wanted to find out the early history. And when
yes.
I was in Japan, I sat him down in my hotel room and we just did a video where he showed all the pictures of his
Yes.
research. It's a classic video. If anyone's watching this and hasn't seen
Yes.
that, they should really check it out.
So it's interesting. So for about a while after I left, initially I didn't want to talk about it. Like I shut it down, cut out of my life. This is over. This isn't me. But then I decided I need to confront this somehow. So I started writing on the internet about it. And it's interesting because I look back on my old stuff that I wrote and I see a very angry and reactionary young man who is still working through what happened to him and can't quite articulate it in a proper way. So recently on my blog, I started this series called Profiles in Conscience, which is partially inspired by Dr. Zimbardo's Heroic Imagination Project.
Love it.
Uh,
Yep.
yes, in which I write about people who followed their conscience when it was difficult. So mainly it was writing about dissidents in the Middle East.
Great.
But I decided to include Nancy Kong in that because I thought she was brave not only for leaving the cult of Moonies, but also from leaving an abusive relationship.
Yes.
And
And I
in
knew
writing,
her husband when he was a little boy. I
yes,
would play with him when he was a
yes,
little boy, and he was arrogant and
yeah,
stuck up and narcissistic even as a child in the
yeah.
image of his father.
And so in writing her story, I felt like I was able to properly articulate and come to terms with what happened. And I feel like now I'm in a far better position to help people and to talk to
Great.
others.
So can I just ask, do you have any siblings?
Oh my goodness. I have from the remarriage, I have like seven.
And are
Right.
they out of the cult, or are they some of them still in?
Well, this is the thing is I feel like I'm the only one who's openly talking about it. Because everyone else, they're kind of wishy-washy to them. It's kind of like a family tradition. A lot of them, they're kind of like, I guess, lapsed Catholics in this sense. Kind of, not really. But I'm the only one who's sort of really critical and really wants to, but no one else really wants to.
Interesting. And how about
Uh,
your parents? Are they out?
well, my father's still in it because he was a part of the original generation, which you were part of. And it's interesting. I liked reading your book because you made me see it from a different perspective. Because what you went through when you were fundraising, we were raised to see that as kind of veteran war stories, as kind of heroic. But then I read it from your perspective, and I thought, oh my goodness, this is really horrifying stuff. My mother, of course, she was a Catholic, and she still is a Catholic, so she was never really a part of it. But I
Hmm.
guess she thought when she married my father that it was wasn't as doctrinaire as it eventually became.
So, did was she involved with a mass wedding or not?
I think they had to get a kind of ceremony, like the
Right.
wine ceremony that they
Right.
do. They kind of had to do that. But I guess she thought it was a kind of a sort of kind of like a universalist kind of organization, multiple religions. I don't
Yeah,
think she was.
depending on the year, they were trying to universalize it, and as
Yes,
long as people paid money to participate, they
yes,
lowered the bar in terms of bowing to the altar with Moon and his wife's
yes.
picture on it.
I mean, I remember. I was thinking back on the memories. We did the pledge every morning.
Me too.
Uh, I went. I actually saw, Hyung Jin, who's doing the Sanctuary Church in Pennsylvania. I saw him live back when he still had the wavy hair. And I went to Injin, the daughter, when she was doing her ministry, which was a quasi reform, more of really kind of whitewashing movement. I went to her.
Wasn't that the music stuff?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Hmm.
yes, it was. Yeah, I was in there for a bit, and I went to all the workshops. So I mean, now people say, "Oh, you're resentful." No, I was serious. I was a serious, committed member.
Yep. Well, I'm delighted to meet you, and I'm at your service to answer any of your questions. And I can tell you that, I was only in for 2.5 years, even
Oh,
though it was at a pivotal time in the cult
yes.
history when Moon was ramping up the militarization of the group in the U.S. They were
Hmm.
moving the headquarters from Washington, D.C. to New York.
Yes,
Neil
Terrytown.
Salonen was the president, and
Yes.
Boone thought that he just wasn't like committed enough.
Hmm.
And the strategy was they stuck me in the national headquarters, and they said, "Steve, we want Neil to follow your model. You're the
Yes.
spiritual Abel to the president
Oh
of the
boy.
Unification Church of America." And I was like, "Yes, Father, whatever you need, Father."
Yes. Yes. It's that's one of those things. Like it's like what Karl Popper said about the unfalsifiable theories. Whenever there's a contradiction in the movement, they explain everything as a Cain and Abel situation, and the contradiction is
Or a
indemnity, or
chapter
you don't know
two.
enough. Yes,
I used to
yes.
teach the divine principle.
Oh my
Let
goodness,
me
yeah.
see. I gotta just jump for a second and show you. This is this is an actual copy of mine
Oh wow,
from 1974,
oh wow,
signed by some of the big shots.
oh my goodness.
But yeah, I'm going to tell you a quick story before we get into your questions because I
Go
didn't
ahead.
put it in the book.
Yeah.
But I was being groomed for leadership by Takeru Kamiyama, who was
Yes.
I was one of his
Kamiyama.
12 American disciples.
Mm.
And so I didn't never went to a 7 day or 21 day or 40 day and they were doing 120 day leadership training for everybody in America
Mm.
that was going to be leadership, and Kamiyama went to Moon, and I'll never forget it because I was standing 10 feet away. And he basically said, I need him here. So please exempt him from the 120-day training. And I
Yeah.
walked over and Moon raised his hand and I graduated. It
Yeah.
was great.
Oh my goodness.
But one of the story that I wanted to share is I had a recurrent dream. I now think of it as more of a nightmare, but it was a dream that I had 3 nights in a row where I was in this giant room. Moon was at the top of a table, a wooden, beautiful table. And I had been to East Garden. I had been to Tarrytown, etc. This was not either of those rooms, but I was at this room. I'm ushered in. There's all these members sitting at the table, and I'm brought up to Moon, and I'm told, Father wants you to cut off your finger. And they hand me a cleaver. And in my dream, I put my pinky out and I chop my finger off, and blood is spurting everywhere.
Oh my
A
gosh.
white thing is given to me to put around my hand and all the blood. And Moon's smiling, smiling. And I told this dream to one of the Japanese senior sisters who was kind of the spy for each center.
Yeah.
And that's when I got promoted to be assistant director at the national headquarters. It was because of those
Oh my
three
goodness.
dreams where I was so fanatical, I was willing to cut off my finger to demonstrate my loyalty.
Yeah. I mean, we were told all kinds of stories like that, you know.
But
It's
anyway, so I'm at your service, Joseph. Ask away. What would you like to know?
okay. So my first question is, this is my issue. The word cult tends to be thrown around a lot by people who just want to smear an ideology, a religion, or a group that they don't like. As concisely as you can, how would you define a cult?
So I would start by referencing my influence continuum, which is on my website at Freedom of Mind, from ethical to unethical. And my perspective is there are cults over here where you know what you're getting into. You're free to leave. There's no penalty if you want to leave. You're free to talk to whoever you want to talk to, read whatever you want to. No phobia indoctrination. And then authoritarian destructive cults where you're basically made in the image of the leader or the ideology, where you're dependent and obedient. So for me, my work is about authoritarian destructive cults, not just cults.
Yes.
So I try to make that distinction, and when I wrote the book, The Cult of Trump, it was with that perspective in mind, and knowing that people. I have another little handout. Like most people are in the fringes of a group. They're not in leadership. Was that you or me? A notification? I heard a little beep. Anyway, most people don't know what's going on inside the upper levels of a cult. They're mostly
Yeah.
down here or down at the base and such. And so I use this because people say, well, I never experienced anything terrible. Like, I wasn't put out to fundraise in a dangerous place at 3 in the morning. And I'm
Mhm.
like, you weren't one of the hardcore fundraisers like I was.
Yeah.
And I gotta say, when I first was moved out of New York, essentially because my family was trying to rescue me out of the cult, um, they sent me to a fundraising workshop, and it was my first time with full-time fundraisers. And I had the thought, oh my God, these people are robots. Now, to my family, my friends, they were like, Steve's a robot. He's in the Moonies. But
Yeah.
to me, as a leader in the Moonies, these people were zombies. They were like, they had nothing on their mind except how many flowers they could sell, how much money they could make, how many people they could, lie to, basically.
Yeah. Uh, so my second question is, so this is something that I think we both have an issue with when the media covers Scientology or the Moonies or any other group. It's always depicted as this weird and eccentric, sort of group that you'd have to be either gullible or very stupid to fall into. But as we know, many intelligent people, rational, seemingly rational people, can be easily recruited into cults. So if you could just clarify the type of techniques, as briefly as you can, that these groups use to recruit otherwise intelligent people into believing in thetans or alien invasions or whatnot.
Right. So I want to start my answer by saying that, and this is Zimbardo has taught me this, Anthony Pratkanis, Robert Cialdini, expert social psychologists. There's something called fundamental attribution error. And what that means is that when people try to understand the behavior of other people, they tend to overestimate personality variables or dispositional variables and underestimate the situational variables or the social psychological variables. So why did Steve get in the Moonies? He was weak, he was stupid, he came from a bad family. There's something wrong with him. It's defective. That's why he got in. And what social psychology teaches is actually we're human beings, we're dependent on our five senses, we're constantly taking in and adapting to our environment. And if you can control someone's behavior, information, thoughts, and feelings for a period of time, you can put them through a phased indoctrination program where you break them down, called unfreezing their identity and their beliefs, indoctrinate them with a new identity and belief, and then refreeze the new identity that then suppresses the person. So, and what people who don't understand cults don't realize is that there's no such thing as an authoritarian destructive cult without deception.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yep.
people are lied to from the beginning.
Yep.
Either that important information is withheld or distorted or outright lying.
Mm-hmm.
So in my case, I was vulnerable. My girlfriend dumped me. I was 19 and a half. I was at Queens College. And I was sitting in the cafeteria waiting for my next class, and three Japanese sisters came over smiling and flirting with me and asking to sit and talk with me. And they said they were students, which they were not. They said they were part of a student club that wasn't religious at all, which was a total lie, right? And it was just, for me, it was like an incremental, you know, carrot in front of the donkey, and Steve
Yeah.
thought, oh, they're really cute and they seem really interested in me. I'm interested in idealism and making the world a better place. But I was, raised Jewish. I had no interest in joining any group or changing my religion or dropping out of school or throwing away my poetry or
Mm-hmm.
cutting off from my family or becoming a right-wing fascist fasting for Richard Nixon during Watergate.
Yep.
But all of those all of those things wound up happening. So why was Steve such a great Mooney? I don't know. I guess I like to do things 100%, whatever I do. I bicycled cross country when I was 16. It seemed like a really cool thing, and it was. So for me, it wasn't like I'm going to commit my life forever to a fascist who is going to destroy the separation of church and state and impose Korean as the international language, which is what the upper levels were saying. I was just like, I want to make a difference. And step by step, my brain got co-opted by the environment and it climbed inside my head. And so if a good Mooney slept 3 hours a night, because father only slept 3 hours a night, I would sleep 3 hours a night.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fortunately, my family rescued me, which is
Yeah.
how I left. At which point I went, how did this happen to me?
Yeah.
Like
I
I
mean,
was an extra honor student. I skipped eighth grade. I was reading 3 to 4 books a week before the Moonies. I haven't read a book other than the Moon Divine Principle book and other things in 2.5 years. What's happened to me?
yeah. I mean, I can attest to this myself. When I was still in the Moonies, I almost joined the Mormons because they had the sisters. They love bombed me. you know, and I was
Yes.
so trusting. And I wasn't 100% sure if I believed in all the Joseph Smith stuff, but they were so nice, and they said, "Oh, you sure? You really, you could you could go to hell if you gotta be careful." And I felt all this pressure on me.
Yep. And, I met many people in cults when I was recruiting for the Moonies, and they would try to recruit me, and I would try to
Yeah,
recruit them, and
yeah,
it didn't work for either
yeah,
way.
yeah,
But just to explain for whoever's listening to this, love bombing is the flattery and oh, Joseph, you're so special.
yeah,
You're so smart. You're
yeah,
so unique.
yeah.
I think that's my phone making all this noise. Um, and it's not real love. It's not real
No,
affection. It's just a technique.
yeah,
And that's a big difference between legitimate groups where they care about you
hmm,
versus cult groups who say, oh, you're a beloved brother until you do something that breaks the rules.
yes,
Satan. Oh, you're controlled by Satan, and
yes,
you're, you know, thrown out
yeah,
if you don't obey,
yeah,
right?
yes. So the third question is about the internet. So I personally credit the internet with helping me leave because I got contradictory information that I otherwise would never have been taught at like Undue or the workshops or whatever. And yet, the internet is a popular recruitment tool for Islamic radicals, white supremacists, conspiracy theorists. What do you make of the very polarized role that internet has to play in all this?
Well, so the internet is more correctly thought of as a communications modality. Um, when I was in the Moonies, cell phones didn't exist,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Pagers started to exist, but these are mind control devices now where people can be recruited online and constantly get notifications and messages and continually be shown YouTubes to indoctrinate them. It can be done on the left wing, it can be done on the right wing, it can be
Yep.
done by atheists, it can be
Yep.
done by libertarians, it can be
Mm-hmm.
done by political, commercial, psychotherapy, large group awareness trainings, multi-level marketing groups, etc. And so the issue is, when the internet first started, I had a client. Actually, it was an uncle of someone in the Moonies that I had helped to get out. He said, "You need to be on the internet." I'm like, "What is that?" He said, "I'm going to set up a website for you." So he set up a website. I was like, "This is fantastic." Why? Because mind control cults want to control information. They don't want you to hear critics and former
No.
members.
No.
And when I would go and do cases helping people to get out of the Moonies and other cults, I literally had to carry like 50 pounds of Xerox copies of documents and things. Now everything's online pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't need all of that physical stuff. But what's missing is people are not educated as they should from the moment they're on a screen how to discern. Like, I think this model is really crucial for people to understand who's real and who's legitimate and worthy of trust and
Mm-hmm.
who isn't,
Yep.
and characteristics of integrity. Because, as you said at the beginning of this, if it's true, it will stand up to scrutiny.
Exactly.
And if it's not true, why would you spend your time, energy, money following something that isn't real, that
Yeah.
isn't true, right? So, the sniff test has to be, amplified to using analytic critical thinking. And one of the essential components that I say in all my lectures is you have to go and seek out critical information to whatever you're into and really listen to the critics and the ex-members and really understand why are they critical and look at it from their point of view and then see whether or not you can defend your point of view or whether or not what they have is much more substantial or not. So there needs to be a real dedication to wanting to know what's true and what's real versus magical thinking, wishful thinking. I invested 10 years of my life, so I don't even want to open the door to the possibility that I'm following a cult leader.
Yes.
It's like, no, you got your whole life, even if you've spent 10 years. It's called sunk cost fallacy, by the way.
Yes.
Well, I've already invested this much time in the group. I'm just going to stay for another year or two, and then it's another 10 years and 20 years. And there's so many people that believed, as I did in the 70s, that the unification movement was going to blossom. We
Yeah.
would all have incredible jobs, and I,
Yeah.
I would be running a university, maybe, was what I was promised at one point. And what's actually true is that Moon and his family have become billionaires.
Yeah.
All the members are living in squalor
Yeah.
or needing to go to their own families and get inheritances so they can function.
Yeah. I mean, that leads perfectly into my next question, which is about the Unification Church. Because, I mean, when I was in it, particularly with Injun going around, there was this new fervor where we actually believed we were actually going to get, because there were all these dates. As you know this, they always have a date where they say, this will be the end of the world, this will be the Chongyoguk, this will be the kingdom of heaven, 2000, 2010, 2012, 2020.
I know it very well. I used to teach it. And Alan Tate Wood, who was a
Yes,
leader who left after 4.5 years, did a great critique
yes.
destroying the timelines.
Oh, yes. Yeah, so ever since Moon died, it seems like the church has been in complete disarray. I mean, we have the son, Sam Park, speaking out. We have it's all splintered. The Hyojin
Tim
has his own.
Park was the illegitimate son
Yes,
of Moon, raised by
yes,
Bohi Pak.
yes.
He's a very important figure if
He
anyone's
is.
watching this.
They denied his existence. They always said he was a
Yes,
rumor. He wasn't real.
right.
But now he's speaking,
Yes,
and I applaud him. He's brave, brave.
I applaud him too. I got to meet him and shake his hand and thank him
Oh,
for speaking out. Anyway, go. Yeah, so aren't they trying to remake the movement with her, the
well,
mother, Jahan?
yeah. She's the Hak Jahan is now the leader. They're selling her autobiography too, because I remember when Moon had his autobiography, the church had to go around and give it away, proselytize it. It's very whitewashed, by the way. But
Of
now
course.
they're doing it with her, and now you have Hyunjin. I think his name is Preston. He's in Brazil. He's kind of off the radar. And Injin's doing a home church. She's kind of trying to be with Hak Jahan, but I think Hyojin, who unfortunately we saw brandishing the guns not long after that tragic shooting in Florida, he's kind of trying to rattle things up and take his place and take Moon's place.
Yeah, the
So,
rod of iron guy.
yeah, so I'm wondering, as someone who's been in it since the 70s, what do you make? Did you ever think that the church would come to this point where it would be in such disarray? And what do you make of the state of the church today?
So honestly, I never thought I'd live to be 66 years old.
Mm,
I thought they would kill me in the first few years. They
yeah,
threatened me and followed me and tried to sue me, but they didn't. And I think partly because after Jonestown happens, my view widened to talk about other cults and not just focus on them because I learned about other cults and I was aghast at how many other cults there were. But you know, I guess I want to say that it was after Jonestown happened that I read the entire 11 volumes of the Fraser investigation, which was
yes,
a congressional subcommittee investigation. That the staff director of that investigation later wrote a book called Gifts of Deceit. His name
hmm
was Robert Betcher.
yes,
And I was an expert for that investigation in the sense that I had left the Moonies while it was still ongoing, and I brought all of the unedited Master Speaks
Yes.
and gave it to the government, including his comments about how black people are inferior,
Yep.
including how he was going to control the government with his people,
Yep.
how he's the master tactician, or all kinds
Yep.
of just really incendiary, horrible things. And I never understood until I read it that the CIA had set up the Korean CIA.
Yep.
The founder of the Korean CIA said under oath that he
Yep.
organized and utilized the Unification Church for use as a political tool.
Yep.
And it opened my eyes to the world of espionage and intelligence agencies and realized, oh my God, North Korea is brainwashing people to be dependent on the leader there. South Korea, they had two coups.
Yep.
In the Cold War, they wanted to stabilize the government of South Korea. So why not use a proxy group, a cult that existed, but let's create some front groups and then
Hmm.
use them for political re-education. And then, as America was wanting to get out of the Vietnam War, some people in the agency said, let's bring and set them up in the U.S. to support Nixon and a strong fight against communism. So there was this whole political, yucky side to this where prior to that, I was like, oh my God, I got to tell the government what's going on with this group. They're dangerous. And then when I realized, oh, this is an entity that's essentially funded by a dark ops of our government. Um, so, it just shifted. And then I realized when he went to jail that they were never going to let him have power. They were just using him to create right wing connections. They still have the Washington Times and
Yep.
UPI, etc. So they're just a right wing tool of influence, as I see it.
All right. So let's transition to Trump because I'm glad you wrote your book because when the moment I saw the Trump phenomenon rising, I thought this guy's a secular Reverend Moon. The parallels are uncanny from the histories of sexual misconduct, disregard for objective truth, blaming others instead of taking responsibility. Even, as you were saying earlier, Koreagate, now we have Russiagate. So we have this similar foreign governments trying to influence American politics through these figures. So why do you refer to Trump's following as a cult, or at least akin to some of these groups and other leaders that we've seen?
Good question. So I think that my thesis in the book The Cult of Trump, which is coming out in paperback shortly, um, let me just say I started being when I was approached to do the book with the knowledge that Trump was a malignant narcissist.
Hmm.
Why? Because I had studied other cult leaders over
Yeah.
my career, and all of the attributes, the lack of empathy, the grandiosity, the need for admiration, the lying, the
Yeah.
manipulation, the paranoia, the inability to trust. You just go down the whole list, and it was
Yeah.
like, and so I wrote a chapter in The Cult of Trump comparing him with Jim Jones, with Hubbard, and with Moon. And I threw in a few other cult leaders. So that's one element of an authoritarian cult is the characteristics of a leader, right? Never takes responsibility, blames everyone else,
Yeah.
lies incessantly, gaslights incessantly. Oh, I never said that.
Hmm.
We
Yeah.
have a video of you saying it. It was yesterday.
Yeah.
Oh, that's fake. That's fake news.
Hmm.
But when I started researching the group, for the book, I realized there were a lot of right-wing cults that were connected to the Moonies. For example, the family,
Oh, yes.
right? I had never heard of the family. I hadn't read Jeff Charlotte's two books, but I was like, oh, because they're the people who did the National Prayer Breakfast for the last 80 years that all presidents come to.
Yep.
And I realized, oh, so Moon was at the prayer breakfast and then he was brought to see Nixon. That resulted in us fasting for 3 days for Nixon.
Yeah.
Oh, the Moonies are involved with the family. Oh, Mike Pence was
Yep.
recruited into the family by Chuck Colson, who went to jail because he did illegal things for Nixon. I'm like, oh, this is starting to make more sense. How the Moonies would gave $2 million to Jerry Falwell when he was having a financial
Oh,
problem.
yep.
And on, all the things that I had learned over the decades. Then I learned about Opus Dei, which is a
Mhm.
Catholic right-wing cult that William Barr was
Yep.
on the board of directors of in D.C. Then I learned about the New Apostolic Reformation movement,
Mhm.
which has an estimated 300 million to 400 million people worldwide. They have an estimated 30 million Americans. But these are cults. Some of them are small, some of them are really big, but they all have leaders who call themselves either apostles or prophets who get direct revelations from God, they claim, and who cast out demons and do faith healing. But they do bite model, behavior control, information, thought, and emotional control methods to make people dependent on them. And with them saying God is using Trump, all their
Mhm.
followers are now in the cult of Trump, even though they're actually following someone else as the intermediary, who I believe, if these apostles say to their followers, you know what, God's not using Donald Trump anymore,
Mhm.
most of the people wouldn't follow Trump because
Mm.
they're that dependent and obedient on their apostle or their prophet,
Oh.
covering them from satanic invasion,
Mhm.
right? And when I'm talking about satanic invasion, I have to tell you, I was brought by father
Yes.
to see the Exorcist movie with hundreds of
Yes.
other Moonies in Greenwich Village and then bust up to Tarrytown, where he said God made the Exorcist. Movie is a prophecy of what will happen if you leave the Unification Church.
Mm.
And that was the beginning of my heavy duty phobia
Yep.
indoctrination.
Oh my
In any
goodness.
case, what I want to say to you, Joseph, is that the way I see it is there are foreign entities like Putin
Yeah.
influencing Trump, but
Mm.
there are internal entities, libertarians, Christian right people, white supremacists,
Yep.
neo-Nazi people,
Yeah.
NRA people, etc. And they all are following Trump, thinking, why? Because of the evil left is going
Yeah.
to destroy freedom, destroy
Yeah.
the Constitution. So they
Yeah.
build up, the enemy, which is a standard, operating principle for mind controllers. You got to have a big devil that's really dangerous.
Yeah.
Use children being trafficked as a technique. I was just listening to a thing on QAnon earlier, which
Oh
is
my goodness.
another part of the cult of Trump.
Yes.
And so it really fits the model of a political cult with a lot of religious figures who are influencing their followers, even though Trump is so obviously malevolent and misogynistic and racist and a
Yeah.
few other words. Um, but the mindset of no matter what, how many lies he tells, no matter what facts are being delivered, people do thought stopping and they just need to believe and follow in faith. And
Yeah.
that mirrors my experience in the Moonies.
Yeah. So I guess I want to talk about. I just want to ask about helping people out of these groups,
Yep.
because I think most people in the Unification Church or most cults are decent. They're idealists, but their ideals are being misused. And a lot of people, even who follow Trump, are good people. They're just their fears and their problems are being exploited.
Yep.
So, what do you think? Because I always believed that dialogue was a great way, but I feel like dialogue is being scrutinized and dismissed. And I think that's different from some of our experiences, because I look at other members like Majid Nawaz, who left, and Christopher Piccolini. and even what Daryl Davis has done with the KKK. And I think that dialogue still has value in trying in building trust. It still has value in trying to get people out of these groups. If you could comment on just
No, you're a
techniques and
hundred percent.
strategies.
You're 100% right. So, the people who hate Trump or worried about his fascistic, criminal activity, they tend to just dismiss Trumpers as stupid,
Yep.
evil, weak, etc. And a lot of people have cut off contact with their family members and friends, or they meet with Trumpers and they start yelling at them or treating them disrespectfully. Now, as a Moonie, when people would yell at me
Hmm.
and tell me I was brainwashed and I was
Yeah.
in a cult, that just made me stronger in my
Yep.
commitment to the group because it validated the persecution, right?
Exactly.
Because the world was of Satan and people are attacking, right?
Hmm.
And so what I've learned, I'm also a therapist and I've been helping people for decades. What works is realizing mind control is not 100%, that even if you're born in a cult or raised like yourself at age 9 in a
Yeah.
cult, there's still an authentic self that cares about integrity and truth, doesn't like to be abused or lied to. And if an engagement happens where you feel respected and cared about, and somebody's willing to listen to you and demonstrates active listening and repeats back to you what your cultic beliefs are, you can have a lot of power to influence them. Now, what the error that a lot of people make is they try to win an argument or
Mm-hmm.
prove that they're right and the cult member's wrong
Mm.
instead of what I'm advocating. And I wrote a book called Freedom of Mind, which is
Yes.
about my approach. Quick plug. Um, the goal is to ask questions that is provocative and makes the person think,
Mhm.
that makes the person think
Yes.
from a different point of view,
Yes.
that genuinely values their thoughts and
Hmm.
their point of view.
Yes.
And I write about all the techniques that I've discovered and things that when I analyzed my own deprogramming, what worked for me. And what was the most effective of the 4 people who worked with me in my 5-day deprogramming was the non-Moonie. His name was Gary Rosenberg. And he would come in and he would sit with me and he'd say, "So, Steve, what do you think? What do you think about what Nestor just said?" And then he'd be quiet. Then I'd be, "Well, I don't think that this point is good or that point is good. I kind of agree with this point." And I would be telling him how to get me out. But it was my real self doing it, not my Mooney self doing it, right? So I was telling them, "Look, I'm Jewish. Talking to me about Jesus and the New Testament is not going to have any force or power with me,
Mm.
you know? And so find out, things that matter to me." And like one of the big ones you mentioned it earlier for yourself was the concept of indemnity,
Yes.
right? And I grew up post World War II, post Holocaust, educated about the Holocaust, and I'm in a group where the leader is saying God wanted the Holocaust to
Yes.
happen because the Jews didn't accept Jesus
Yeah.
and it was necessary for indemnity.
Yeah.
That was a big pill to swallow, which I
Yeah.
swallowed as a good Moonie.
I did too.
But in terms of dissonance between my real self and my cult self, that was a whale.
Yeah. So I realize we're technically out of time, but if you have time for just one more question.
Yes, please.
Okay. So this is about the coronavirus pandemic and the fact that many of us are at home, social distancing, quarantining for our health. But I think it's important that we recognize that it's not a healthy situation for everyone. And you could have people who being stuck at home means being stuck in a cult, or being stuck in an abusive relationship or an abusive family, which, as you've said, that in domestic violence or abuse situations, they use a lot of these similar techniques that
Yep.
and deceptive tricks that the cults use. So, what is your advice for helping people? How can we help people in these situations?
Oh boy. Being a good neighbor, caring about other people, saying hello, even though you may be having a mask or whatever, like
Yeah,
knowing, just being a human being that cares, that has compassion, and letting people know, hey, that if you ever need someone to talk to, or if you ever feel like you're not safe, there are hotline numbers. You can always, write down the domestic abuse hotline, or you can report if it's an underage child. You can report to state agencies or government agencies. But the reality is, as I see it, that science is not perfect, but it's what has helped human beings develop to the point where we've developed, where we can fly in airplanes, where we have penicillin to stop, so many different major medical, problems, etc. But it's not perfect. And the thing about science that's different than a cult is that science assumes that they don't know the truth with a
yes.
capital T.
Hmm.
And it assumes that if you observe, if you do experimentation, and then you have a theory, and then you subject that theory and the evidence of whatever experiments you've done to a community, that the truth will eventually come out. And then you might, for example, they didn't believe ulcers were caused by bacteria until very recently.
Mm.
And so for decades, people were thinking ulcers were something else, but it was actually a bacteria. But this is very different than religion and faith, especially where the people think the Bible was an inerrant word of God, and you have to do everything of what the Bible says. And what I've learned is in my Jewish studies is that there's so many things wrong with the Torah in the sense of passages saying go and do genocide and wipe out these people, or spare the rod and spoil the child,
Yeah,
or any number of things that we now know with science
yeah,
and studying human development is traumatic and wrong and unethical. So what I see with the pandemic is this conflict going on in people's minds of who's trustworthy. Like, do I wear a mask or do I not wear a mask? Is it real or is it a hoax,
yeah.
etc. And we need experts.
Yep.
Experts are experts because they know more about something than everybody else.
Hmm.
Like, it's weird that people say you're a cult expert. I mean, it was weird when my book first came out in 1988 because it was like, I don't have a degree. Like, I got a master's in counseling, but there's like no degree in cult expertness. But I started getting compliments from other experts who read the book who were like, you really know what you're talking about, like Robert Lifton,
Yeah.
Margaret Singer, Lewis
Yes.
Jolyon West, etc. And so, I really know a lot and I want to teach people, which is why I keep writing. I'm in a doctoral program right now at my
Yes.
tender age because I want to influence the legal system to understand undue influence isn't just with underage people or elderly people, but smart, intelligent people can be deceived and under the proper set of circumstances can be indoctrinated and taken advantage of and taken over.
Yes.
So to answer your question about the pandemic, I think what it's providing an opportunity for everyone to step back and reflect on
Hmm.
who am I, what do I want out of life?
Yes.
Was the track that I was on, go to college, get a job, have a house. Is that like really going to fulfill me? And what about my neighbor who doesn't have a job and is hungry? Do I want to feed them? Do I want to have that kind of attitude of care? And it's the people who stood up for the Jews to Hitler who could do that process in their mind of going, if Hitler was coming after me, I'd want my neighbor to help me. So therefore, I should help my neighbor.
Hmm.
Like that is an advanced development to be
Yeah.
able to put yourself in someone else's shoes.
Yeah.
And I think humanity needs to undergo a huge development in perspective based on survival. Like the planet is not flat, it's really round. We know this scientifically.
Yes.
And if a nuclear blast happens in one place, it's going to affect other places.
Yep.
If there's a pandemic in one place, it's going to affect other places. We
Yes.
can't afford nationalistic boundaries.
Exactly.
We need to really be thinking about survival and not
Yes.
just survival of humans, but of the species and of our
Yes.
habitat so that we
Yes.
can have many more generations live. So I feel very passionate about wanting people to understand about mind control and to
Yes.
control their own minds as a solution to someone else telling them what reality is.
Yes.
And honestly, I'm so pleased, Joseph, to meet you and know you because honestly, most former members of cults kind of skulk away and they're embarrassed to say any that I was in a cult.
Yes.
There are actually millions of us in America.
Yes.
And if 10% of us started talking to their neighbors, and hey, by the
Yes.
way, I was in a multi-level marketing cult, or I was in an
Yes.
abusive marriage with a controlling
Yes.
narcissist, and explain the bite model and explain the influence continuum, we'd be in a much better place.
It would. If I can make a just quick topic, I think one misconception that comes up about people like us is that when we say that cults like Scientology or Jehovah's Witnesses or whatnot are worse than like traditional religions, they think that we are excusing the problems of traditional religions or as if traditional religions haven't done bad things. But I would say a bigger difference is that in a lot of traditional religions, as you were saying, Judaism, there are traditions in Judaism that are critical of some of those teachings that interpret them. There are progressive traditions in Judaism. There are progressive traditions in Christianity, even in the Catholic Church. Some of the most people are most outraged about the abuse in the Catholic Church are Catholics. I know
Yeah,
them. And
yeah,
there are Reformed traditions in Islam. There are Reformed traditions in Buddhism. But the thing is,
exactly.
in a lot of these groups are so authoritarian and close-knit, as we saw with the Unification Church, someone tries to reform and change something, they're kicked out. You know.
Yep. Yeah, no, I think you're making a very important point, not to throw out the good, the baby with the bathwater comment,
Mhm.
and that there's, I have a lot of friends who are atheists, and they're kind of militant atheists, and they can't believe that I believe in God, and that I like to pray and meditate and study Torah and be part of a spiritual community. But it works for me.
Mm.
And my community is very progressive and very, gay friendly. We have a female rabbi now. The founding rabbi was a comedian before he was a rabbi. He wrote the Big
Yes.
Book of Jewish Humor. And I was like, this is the kind of religious group I relate to, where you don't take yourself so seriously
Yes.
and where you actually believe that it's your spiritual duty to help other
Mm.
people. That it's not just about taking care of number one,
Yes.
yourself, but helping other people. And I get joy from helping other people. I'm so pleased to meet you and to
No.
hear you say that I touched your life in a positive way
Oh, you
and
did.
that you're going out to help others. I'm thrilled.
I feel it's my responsibility. I feel like that's the best way I can make use of the 10 years I spent in the movement of through helping other people so they don't make the same mistakes I did and to think for themselves.
Yeah, it's great.
And I find there's an interesting connection we both have. We were both interviewed by Seth Andrews of the Thinking Atheist podcast.
Oh, okay.
Yes, and it was funny. I mean, my interview with him was terrible. Like I completely messed up in a lot of places. But I remember when I told him, I think you like to hear this, when I told him about how we in the church interpreted Adam and Eve, right? He described it. He described it in the funniest way. He said that, oh, so you're basically saying that Satan gave Eve an STD and gave it to Adam.
Yeah.
And I said,
Yeah, so
it's like I never thought of
I
it that
couldn't
way.
help but comment on the Nigerian physician who is saying that hydrochloroquine, you know,
Oh my goodness. Yes.
and then she went on, in another interview, I guess, talking about demon seeds.
Yes.
And I
Demon.
was like,
Yeah.
oh, the Moonies believed in demon seeds.
Yes.
That's how the fall of man took place. I used to
Yeah.
lecture chapter two all
Oh
the
my goodness.
time opposite
Yes.
the main library on Fifth Avenue in Manhattan.
Yeah.
But it's, I just really believe that legitimate religions need to be honest
Mm-hmm.
when they recruit people and tell
Yep.
them up front who they are, what they believe, and what's expected of you when you join.
Yep.
And if you decide it's not for you, good luck.
All right.
Stay in
Yes.
touch versus Satan is going to get you.
Yes.
Evil
Yes.
spirits are
Evil
floating
spirits.
around your hair right now.
Yes.
I can see them.
Satanic thoughts. That's where the doubts come from.
Right. And love, I believe, is stronger than fear
Yes.
in the end. And I really want to again thank you for this opportunity to
Oh,
share. And I would love, there's an estimated 75,000 Americans who are ex-Moonies,
really?
and I know about 20. Like, I
Oh,
don't know where they are. They haven't surfaced. They haven't gone
yeah.
public. They haven't said, "Oh yes, I was born in it," or "I
Yes.
was in it for 3 years," or
Yeah.
whatever. But like I said earlier, it would be so great if people could just get past the fear of stigma that
Hmm.
people are going to think, "Oh, you're weak for being in a cult," and just make it part of your life story and say, "Yeah, I was in this group and this is
Yeah.
what we believed." And then, like you, then I started asking questions, and then I said to myself, why be in it if it's not real, if it's
Yeah.
not true?
I always say one of the greatest ex-cult members of all time was Malcolm X when he left the Nation of Islam, and he was eventually killed because of it. But took a lot of bravery to do that, especially considering all his money, all his investment was in there.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you mentioned that because I get some hassle when I mention Nation of Islam.
Oh boy, yeah,
They're now connected now with Scientology, the Nation of
yes,
Islam.
yeah.
Don't get me started. Listen, I've got to run, but it's a
All right,
pleasure, and
thank you,
you're very
thank you
welcome.
so much. You helped me. You gave me my life back. Uh,
You took your
I'm
life back.
yes,
I'm delighted to be part of that process, but own it. You did it.
yes. So I will write a transcript of this. I'll send it to your assistant, and they can look over it and make sure it's all okay. You can
Everything's
feel
fine with me. I'm going to turn off the recording and thank you again, Joseph.
all right. Thank